Так, ну вроде пошло, да?
If I right click, the character will rotate to how the camera's facing. We can walk, we can run. And the reason why I call this an MMO style is I follow World of Warcraft for this kind of movement. So the A and the D keys will actually rotate the character. And then the Q and E keys have him strafe. And then the S key moves him back. And of course, if we walk up to this column here, we climb it and we're good. And of course, we can jump and fall, and here we do. So we've got a character that we put together in what, like 5 seconds? So let me show you a little bit of what I did. I'll go into details in a future video, but basically what we've got is once we added the motion controller, these styles and these checkboxes really are just shortcuts. And what happens if you go to the advanced tab is the motion controller is all about adding these different motions that you want your character to do. And then there are properties that you can set in case you change his size or you want him to be able to jump higher. And so by using the basic tab, we click these things and it automatically, these set up things like the camera, and these just basically turned on and added motions as needed. And of course, you've got a big list of motions here. And the idea really is that you or others could create motions and continue to add them. So if you wanted swimming or a cover system or whatever, those would get created, then you just put them in. And so if you have a character like a dog, you obviously don't need a cover system for that, so you wouldn't add it. You have a humanoid, then you add it. So this idea here is that the motion controller is for characters beyond just humanoids, and it's extensible, so you can add and create motions as you need to. But by using the basic tab, you can get up and running, you know, within seconds, literally. So I hope that explains how to use it, and then what I'll do in future videos is I'll go into a little bit more detail about the options, about the camera rigs and the different styles of cameras that come with and all that good stuff. Anyways, check out the latest motion controller and I'll talk to you on the forums. Bye.
Hi everybody, and welcome to a quick tutorial looking at creating big help, especially if you're using actually I'm going to also show you this, hope you don't mind a little bit of a detour. Let's create another cylinder and give it only 8 sides and build that out. So this is really just about the same. Let's just keep all things equal and go through and do the same quick auto stitch on this. This is probably something we could enable as a default, come to think of it, for the cylinder. Keep that in mind. Okay, so now these two are exactly the same. Obviously the faces on this are quite a bit larger. We have fewer subdivisions or cuts. 2 actually, the regular barrel and barrel old. I'm going to apply. We have the pivot of this UV group here. If I use the right mouse button, I can move that pivot, so I'll be able to rotate or scale around that point. And holding shift will snap to vertex points, and control will snap to the actual grid. So I'm going to hold shift so that it snaps to the corner down here.
Hey, this is Tim with Udi, so I thought I'd take you through the sword and shield motion.
Виктор, вот у него много получается таких вот штук.
Remember from the previous videos, is 2 different approaches.
Интересно, вот как раз
where we actually use true colliders on, let's say, the sword and the shield.
Это тоже
and
нам
then
понадобится.
in that case, we use Unity's trigger events to determine whether an attack was made and blocked or whether the attack does damage. But in this case, I'm actually showing you the
Хотя вместо щита будут использоваться подручные средства, типа там табуреток каких-нибудь.
When that area turns green, if something's within that area, will do damage to it. So if I come up on this goblin, for example, he's in my field of attack as I do these different swings, so he's going to take damage and basically when this counter goes down to 0, he's going to die. And so you can see here by doing this approach, I've got different styles of attack that I can do. He'll fall within different zones. So we've got a little bit of flexibility how we play. And then which attack you allow characters to do is totally up to you. So you can have them do these, you know, the power swings, the back swings, or even the jump ones. You can control when that happens by basically taking over what I call the combatant, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But so that gives you a general idea of how combat works here. So I thought what I'll do next is I'll turn on the goblin and let's see him actually fight me, and we'll see a little bit more about how combat works. Okay, so what I did was I created a script here that basically is AI that controls the goblin, and this goblin right now doesn't have a shield, so he can't block, but he can attack, and he is going to follow me around. And so what I'm going to do right now is not even try to fight him. I'm just quite honestly going to try to avoid him here, and you're going to be able to see that he comes in and does the attacks, you know, the same way that I did before as well. So he's got these different styles. He also has a field of attack, and you'll see here that, and I've got him randomizing right now, that he's just going to keep coming after me and using the different field.
Вот, кстати, Виктор, вот из этого. Браулер. А что такое браулер? Ну вот, рифл, пистоль, анимации нам тоже нужны, кстати. Данс не надо. Дроп 3D это капли или что это такое? Капли дождя. Женские движения. Файтер пак, файтин аним сет. А сколько это все дело весит? В общем, полезная штука. Можешь все это мне скинуть, а я там просмотрю, что нужно, оставлю.
How often I block, because what will happen is he can actually break through. He can actually break through my shield. If I keep my shield up and takes a hit, he'll eventually break through it. But if I drop my shield and raise it again, I basically reset the health of my shield. And so I wanted to do it this way. And so you see there, he got me low. He hit underneath my shield. But I wanted to do it that way with the shield. This way someone couldn't just hold up the shield and constantly be pounded on and basically protected forever.
Скачаю
so what happens with this approach
после стрима,
is that
если
the
ты
goblin
выложишь.
is able to swing under my shield. Or if I just keep my shield up, he'll actually hit through it. So again, you have control over that on if you want that to happen. But I thought that was a neat way of doing combat. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to try to fight the goblin, and I'm going to show you, talk to you a little bit about how I lock on.
В первую очередь, Виктор, лучше то, что касается вот этого всего. Утий, как он там называется, да? А все остальное можно вторым пакетом. Архивом.
So now what I'm going to do is actually try to fight the goblin, so to avoid him. So I'm actually going to use my shield. So he hits that. I'm going to hit him back. I can take some hits, but you can see that whoever gets in first really is the one that's going to do damage. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lock on to the goblin. So now he's getting better attacks in on me. Now if I strafe and I run around, I'll actually keep focusing on the goblin. And I'm going to stay locked onto him. And you can see the lock icon that I'm using here. And of course, all of this is customizable. But this gets me into a way of being able to attack him. You can see he got me with another low hit. And so the idea is obviously you can block, you can move back and forth. Eventually, not with the first release, but as I improve some of the packs, I'd like to add dodging, you know, if I have some animations, but you can see it's working out pretty well here. So let me show you another view of combat going, and I think I really, as I play it more, the more I like it as well. So hopefully you will as well. So let me show you another view here of combat. All right, so I thought it would be cool to just sort of see the attacks from this perspective. And so here's me and the goblin just going at it. So when he goes down low like that, he hits underneath my shield. And so you can see that basically we're able to trade back and forth. Now, what's going to end up happening soon, you're going to see him do a spinning leap attack. That one can't be blocked. So if he does that while my shield is up, I won't be able to block it. There you go. That's the one. So even though my shield was up, once he did that spin, he basically just broke right through my shield. And of course, there he's hitting underneath my shield. And I don't really have any logic going on with which attack he's choosing. Right now, I just have it where the attacks are being chosen randomly. But I think it still looks pretty good. It looks like there's some decision making going on, even though there's not. But the truth is, you actually can write your own AI where he could choose which attacks that he wants to do. So you'll have a lot of control over this system. So the one other thing I was going to try to show you here, if I can get it to happen, is the chaining. So the idea of chaining is, it's not really a combo system like, oh, ×2 damage ×3, although it could evolve into that. It's really the idea that if I'm at the end of a swing, I can immediately go into another swing without having to come to like that idle position. And when you see a green circle under my character, that's the indicator that if I click now, I can do a chain. And you have complete control over setting up chains how you want by using animation events. But let me go ahead and see if I can show you that. So I'm going to try to, there you go. Let's see, I'm going to try to, so if my timing was better, there you go. So I don't know if you noticed, but basically what I did was I swung, the circle came up, and I was able to chain. Well, I was able to chain if I clicked enough, but I wasn't able to. So, and I have it right now where I'm just randomizing my attacks as well. So it's really not, other than me just sort of clicking at the character, and I'd be a little bit smarter and maybe backing off as opposed to always pushing on him. But if I can get a swing in, let's see. Because it's random, I don't have, not every swing has a chain, but I think you get the point here is that combat's going to have us go back and forth, we can block, and it plays really fun. So I've been having a good time just coming in here and attacking the goblin and testing things out, making sure things are good. But it's starting to play really well, and I am going to have a demo for you. I just want to clean up the scene a little bit more. But I thought the next part of this video, what I would do is just go ahead and show you some of the components and walk through them. And now that you've seen combat in action, it'll make a little bit more sense. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and show you next. Hey, this is Tim with Udi. So in the last video, what I did was I took you through and showed you combat happening. So we controlled the character, the goblin hit us, we hit him, all that good stuff. So you can check that out in the last video. This video is going to focus on how does it all work. So there's a couple things to remember. When I talk about the Sword and Shield motion pack, this is way more than just a set of animations. In fact, we're using Mixamo's animations because they're free. And I show you how to download those from Mixamo. But this is really a melee combat system that can be used with different weapons and of course evolved into bigger things. But really the Sword and Shield is Udi's approach to a melee combat system. So with that, the thing to also remember is that when I build assets, I don't have the luxury of just building them for my game, right? Because the reality is literally thousands of people use this, and everybody's game is unique, or hopefully they're unique. And so I have to build things in a way that are very componentized and let you expand on them. So some of the decisions that I make, you may go, well, why did he break that up into two things? Well, the reason is that this way you can use it one way, someone else can throw out maybe one of the components and use their own component. So I just wanted to lay that out as sort of a foundation as we go through what the Sword and Shield motion pack is all about. So probably the best place to start is the pictures in the documentation itself. So this is the link to the documentation, right? And there's several pieces that come together that bring this combat system to play. So first is of course the motion controller, and in there would be the actor controller. So that's the character controller and the thing that's managing the animations. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And of course the all of my motion packs will require the motion controller. Then we've got this thing called an actor core, and what this represents is how does in general, how does the actor behave? So things like, what does it do when it takes damage? Or what does it do when it dies, kind of thing. So in here, what you'll see is that I talk about these cores, like a sword core and a shield core. To me, a core is the base behavior of the object. Now, characters can be very advanced, so either this actor core can be very advanced, or you may have other things like AI that's augmenting it. But the idea here basically is that a core is a thing that's sort of the lifeblood of the object. So in this case, we have an actor core that tells us how do we handle damage. The combatant is a special mono behavior, and what it does is basically help manage the flow of combat. So a combatant is used to determine who my target is, or how do I get a new target, or how am I going to react in this situation. So while the actor core is sort of a high level, how does my life work, the combatant is more specific to how do I work within this combat situation. Okay? So then, of course, we have, in this case, a sword core and a shield core, and these both inherit from a thing called a weapon core. So if you follow how I like to build things, I like to build things as components, and of course inherit. So the weapon core really has a lot of the logic that we're going to use here, but the sword core determines how much damage the sword can do, what its reach. The shield core determines, how much damage can it take before it can't block anymore, what's the area of its block, that kind of stuff. And then we have attributes, and so this is a good example of where somebody could say, Tim, why didn't you just put attributes in the actor core? It certainly would make sense if I was building my own game and I knew exactly what attribute system I was using. But let's say you're using something like RPG attributes, or you've got your own system. I want you to be able to replace out this attributes component and still use the actor core and the combatant and all of this stuff. So what I do is basically I create an attribute source, which is very similar if you use my components in the past, that I have an inventory source. This way, if you want to use Inventory Pro or a different solution, or use my basic inventory solution, you can use any inventory solution with the whole combat system. So hopefully that makes sense about the components that are going to come together, and I'm going to show you those in more detail. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is this combat message. So the way combat really flows, I'm going to go down here, the way combat really flows is that we're passing messages around. So I'm going to try to get this all visible here. And basically what happens is when someone initiates an attack, so this guy here is going to attack, we basically start the combat message. And we start flowing around. He says, yep, I'm going to attack. Oh, did I hit something? Let me get using my sword core, how do I get my damage? Let me go ahead and start building that message, and I can do some work ahead of time. Maybe I augment the damage. And then I'm going to pass that message to the guy that's being attacked. And then he says, oh, hey, I'm attacked. He can read the message and he can modify and say, well, you attacked me, but I blocked it. And then they'll pass the message back to the first combatant who goes, oh, okay, I did damage to you, great, I'm going to play the sound. Or I see you change the message and you've now blocked me, so now I need to react to that block. So this flow that goes back and forth, I call it a act-react kind of system, uses this message that gets created and sent around. The other thing that you'll see here is that we have a chance here to customize combat. So that combatant that I talked about, he has some events that you can tap into, such as like, hey, the character just attacked, or I'm going to attack, so I'm giving you a chance to modify some values, maybe how much damage is done or which attack we use, that kind of thing. And of course the combatant over here gets the I'm attacked message. So by tapping into these messages, you can actually control what happens during combat. So the documentation, I know sometimes my documentation can get a little long, but my philosophy is I'd rather give you more information, let you just look at the pictures or find the pieces that you want, but make sure that you've got everything you need to customize the system as you want, or ignore it all and just use it as is. Okay, so I think that's the big pieces I wanted to show in this. So let's go look at the project itself. Now, your player and your NPCs are really going to be built pretty much the same. They're all going to have a actor controller, no surprise there, right? This is the thing that is basically the low-level character controller, so no surprise. They're both going to have a motion controller, again, no surprise. This is the thing that's driving our animations, driving the characters, and in this case we've got these PSS motions, right, pro sword and shield motions that are going to control our attacks and our block. And if you look at the goblin, he has the same exact thing. So no surprise, that's the actor controller and the motion controller working together. And then when we start getting into some new things here, let's look at our actor core. So remember we talked about that. So it's not really advanced, but what it's basically saying is which attribute are we going to use for health, and if I'm attacked and nothing else tells me what to do, what damaged and death animation should I play? Now, typically these are overridden by which weapon are you holding, so you can have a different death animation for that. But just in case there's nothing, what's the defaults? So you can see my actor core here is actually pretty small, which is fine. You would probably inherit from this and expand on it, but this is just sort of a good starting point, okay? And again, the goblin is going to have the same thing. So the goblin's got an actor core as well. So now let's look at the combatant. So the combatant does a couple of things for us. First, it helps us define information that's combat oriented. So in this case, what we're talking about is what is the we'll call it the core, I don't want to use that word again. What is the combat position, the combat center of the character? And what I use is basically the spine, and basically say somewhere between the shoulders, this is the thing that basically distances are checked from, and if I do any kind of ray cast or cone cast or whatever to try to figure out where an enemy is, this area between the shoulders here is that center point. Because obviously characters typically are at the bottom here. So I wanted something that represented basically the heart, or I think the shoulders, where combat comes from. So you get that, how far does the character reach? And then this is information about how do we do that lock on that I showed in the previous video. So this is sort of Dark Souls style. you lock on and now you strafe around the character. The combatant is responsible for that. And then of course we've got some debug stuff. But there's more going on in the combatant than just what you see here in the inspector and that whole flow of combat. I'm going to show you a little bit later how we can customize combat, but I hope that sort of makes sense in a good just sort of starter. And again, the player is going to have a combatant too, right? He's got his center area, he's got all of that stuff, his ability to target or not target, that good stuff. So it's in there. Okay, so let's look at the basic inventory. So this is something that's evolved into something a little bit more beyond basic, but it's still able to be replaced. You could still use something like Inventory Pro. In that case, Inventory Pro would be the thing that manages putting weapons on your character or not. But basically what the inventory system I have here is it consists of this idea of items, this idea of slots, and then weapon sets. And really what weapon sets is I have multiple weapons that when I equip them or unequip them, I want to apply these items together. So let's say I've got this longbow, and what he knows is when I say equip this weapon set, what he does is basically says, if there's something in the right hand, take it out. If there's something on the left lower arm, think the shield, take it off. And then in the left hand, put my longbow, and in my ready projectile, put the arrow, right? So this is, what are all the things I'm willing to equip when I go ahead and basically turn on a character. So let me disable the goblin here and just, I know you've seen this before, but I feel like it's probably worth showing it again. Let's turn off our goblin and let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so on our character here, if I hit 1, which is weapon set 1, weapon set 1, then what I'm doing basically is, what I'm doing here is equipping the sword and the shield, and if I have a bow, I'm taking that off. Now, when I come here and I hit 2, ouch, I don't know why I did that in the game. When I hit 2, I put the sword away and I draw the bow out. And of course, I do that because weapon set 2 says, hey, anything that's in my right hand, the sword, anything that's down here, put it away. So you get the point that not only do I contain information about what is it that the sword is and how does it work and where do I position it, the basic inventory system also contains information about how do I equip and unequip. And I know that there are actually some of the cool beta testers are putting in different animations so you can have the sword on the back and all of that. And when you do that, that's perfectly work. You can just swap out which equip and which store animation we use here. So the basic inventory isn't so basic anymore, but again, you can replace it as needed. Probably spent too much time on that, but anyway. Okay, so I think we went over the different pieces here. And hopefully that gives you an idea of how that all comes together. But let's look at the Goblin's AI. Okay, so what I did here was I put together this Goblin, and I'm just going to stand here and let him whack on me. Again, this is all in the previous video, but since I'm talking about it. But, you know, the Goblin knows to come up, he chooses an attack to use, and if you watch him, you're going to see he's randomizing his attacks. And I've told him, and if I told him that he could block, that what you would see is that he's going to, even though he's not holding a shield right now, see how he goes into the block pose, he's able to do that, okay? So let's take a look at this code. So really, you can see here, like, to me, this doesn't seem like a lot of code, right? This is all the AI that controls the Goblin. So we've got a bunch of properties about movement speed, rotation speed, blah, 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 all that good stuff. But really what's happening here is in this update function is first we go ahead and equip our weapon set. That's what the Goblin does first. And then he says, hey, do I have a target or not? And I look to see whether I have a valid target that I want to follow. And if I do, this is the new way that the motion controller can follow characters and even activate the walking animations. You just set the target position and the character will automatically start playing whatever walking motions are available to it. So this to me is a great way for, and an easy way to start using the motion controller with more NPCs. You don't have to worry about which walking motion he's using. The motions will figure that out. You just tell it, hey, move your position. Okay. And so then I do some things. This is where the messages come back in, right? So here, if it's time for me to block, what I can do is send that combat message, or send a combat message to the motion controller. And this is what's cool about this, is that I could have several different motions that know how to block. So let's say the character has pulled out his sword and shield and I send this, hey, go block combat message. Well, then he'll know, he'll use the sword and shield motion to block with the shield. But what if the character's actually got, let's say, two swords? Well, you could still have, let's say, a block motion where he crosses his two swords in front of him. The AI code doesn't actually need to know which one of those to call. It just sends the message block, and the right motion based on the weapons he's holding, he'll actually perform that block maneuver. So I think this is actually a really cool way to control our characters through AI by using the motion controller send message function. And of course this all works with my message dispatcher, but you can, even if you don't own the message dispatcher, you can send the message directly to the motion controller, which is what I'm doing here. Okay? So now the same thing for the attack, right? Again, I don't have to know which weapon I have in hand. So when when we have, let's say, a dual swords, or even with the bow, when I get that ready for NPCs, all I have to say is attack, and the character will attack with whichever weapon he has in hand. And again, we do a send message. The block, and here I can cancel, let's say, a block and say stop. So you can see here the logic for the AI really isn't that, I don't think it's that complicated, and it's certainly not very long. And all of that gets our goblin moving around as we would expect. And so watch as he moves forward. You can see he's walking. Of course, me, you know, I'm running away from him, but the simple logic I showed you is going to have him do all the combat and the attack. Okay, so now let's take a second and talk about customizing. So you saw now that the goblin was doing these randomized attacks, and the reason for that is if I look at the goblin's motion controller and I look at his basic attacks motion, we have all of these different attacks that he could do. So these are called attack styles, and attack styles, each one defines this sort of field of attack. Where can the attack happen in? And if my character was within this field of attack, that's where the damage would be taken. So I talked about that in the previous video. And so you can see that for each one of these attacks, we can say, hey, is it blockable by something like a shield? In which case most attacks are, but not that cool big jumping spin attack. And we can say what the field of attack is, what the range is, and a damage modifier. So our jump spin could do twice the amount of damage as the sword normally does. So this gives you some control here. Well, we choose which one's being used by either setting a number or -1, which means randomize it, right? So that's when we play this, the goblin's randomly choosing one of these attack styles, right? So to customize this, you certainly could add your own animation into the animator, and then we could set up a new attack style and give it a different parameter ID, and then boom, all of a sudden you've got a new attack. The other thing we can do with the goblin is we can tell him which attack to use instead of having this randomized. So let's go back to our code. So on the combatant, you've got, remember when I talked about the documentation and I showed you the hooks that we have on activated, on pre-attack, on attacked, on the combatant? What you can do is come in here and basically tap into these functions and then take control over what you want to do. So in this case, for the goblin, I'm saying, hey, when you activate an attack, when the goblin is getting ready to swing, right, what I want you to do is go to this function. And what I'm going to do in this function is I'm going to tell the motion that's getting ready to do the attack, I want you to always use the first attack style. So don't randomize it, always use this first one. Now, why would I want to do that? What if you had a stamina system and you wanted to build that into your NPCs or your combatant? Or what if maybe he can only do that special attack once every 10 minutes? You can totally control that just by overriding or tapping into this function here. Okay, so now let's go take a look at how our goblin behaves with this. So this will be his first attack, which is the /. And so when we play this, you're going to see that the goblin will move forward, he'll do his /, and that's the only attack he ever does, because I'm overriding that and not allowing him to randomize. So as you can imagine, you could do all sorts of things like say, hey, is the enemy in front of me blocked? If so, do a low attack so I can hit under his block. Or is the enemy in front of me doing something else? So you have control over combat. And just like we just tapped into this on attacked function here, you can do the pre-attack, which lets you modify the message, right? You can do the post-attack, which has you react after the defender reacted. You get the point. You can change these things. So you can do that either by overriding the combatant itself, which may be easier if you're creating a more complex system, or if you just want to tweak it a little bit for an NPC, you can do what I did here. So we've customized combat by adding one line of code down here and one little tiny function right here. And now we've totally changed how the goblin's going to attack. So this was a longer video than I planned, but I hope this gives you an idea of how the system sort of works and why the pieces are, and at least gives you a good starting point. And again, with all my assets, you know, they're componentized so that anybody can use them in any game, and you can throw out the combatant if you want to customize it. You can add new attack styles if you want to, if you have animations for those and you want to use those. The idea is I really am trying to give you the ability to create your unique game. So again, I'll see you on the
Тут всякие заклинания, да? Спелы.
So the spellcasting motion pack allows you to create spells that affect NPCs, the environment, even yourself. In this case, we're going to teleport away from the goblins. And it also lets you create effects that last a while. So when they walk through this firewall, you're going to see the goblins actually catch fire, and they take damage over time, not just damage while in the firewall itself. But we can create lots of effects, like this poisonous gas that will make them choke and die. And you'll see this goblin here is able to cast spells himself. In this case, he healed himself because he took damage from the poisonous cloud. So the spell casting motion pack allows you to do a lot. So let's look at how the spells actually work. And basically, spells are just assets that are in your folder, and each spell is a separate little object. So we can have as many spells as we want.
Это не игра, это ассеты, я смотрю.
We put that
Связанные с
into
анимациями.
what I call a spell inventory. And think of this like their grimoire or their spell book. And so here's all the...
На основе этого спел инвентаря можно сделать всякие такие работы, наверное. Типа что-то строить там еще. Так как у нас нету
When a spell is cast,
чистых
an
спелов
instance
именно.
of that spell is created, and basically we run through the flow. So let's look at this real quick. So this is what defines the magic missile spell. And basically what happens is these little nodes with the start tag, as soon as the spell is started, these initiate and they start a flow. So think of them like two threads or two different flows happening at the same time, because we've got 2 starts. And then once it's done, that flow, like in this case, we spawn some particle effects on the hand, and then it's done. This flow, this part ends. Well, this part continues until it's done. And in this case, we wait for the animation to get to a certain point. If we're being cast by an NPC, right, then we're going to spawn the particle in one way. If we're being cast by a player character, we spawn the particle in a different way. And in either case, once that projectile hits something, then we cause damage and we apply a vector. So the idea of creating a spell is really creating the flow for the spell, setting things like what particle effects that you want to use, and then determining what the effect is once, let's say, the spell, in this case a projectile, has achieved its goal. And so each of these, whenever we cast a spell, this sort of like little flow is created and we go through it. So the act of you creating a spell is you just coming up here to our spell editor and basically saying, I want to create a new spell in here, and going through and creating a flow just like you saw there. And of course there's documentation and stuff. So I think what you'll find is that looking through these spells are a great example of how I do things, and sometimes it can look a little confusing with the flow, but I think if you step through it one by one, you'll see that all we're doing is building up these nodes more and more to create more and more complex spells. And the thing that we really want to be able to do is let you use your own effects. So let's take Magic Missile again as an example. When I spawn a particle effect on the right hand, this can be any particle effect you either create or buy off the asset store. So knowing that my particle effects aren't going to be that great, what you want to do is replace them with your own and create your own spells. So the spellcasting motion pack is a lot more than just a bunch of animations coming together. It's a whole flow of creating these separate little graphs or flow charts that represent a spell to do something. And of course, what I'll do in the documentation that I have and in some future videos is talk about how do we go ahead and create a spell from scratch and walk you right through that. But I hope that's a good intro to what the spellcasting motion pack has available to it, and I hope you pick it up and check it out. Bye. Hey, this is Tim with Udi.
Вот это система одевания персонажа.
There's been a pretty cool improvements when it comes to skin meshes and being able to set characters up with equipment in the editor, as well as doing it at runtime through code. But I thought I'd show you mount points just in case you haven't seen it before. Mount points allows you to connect objects together and basically snap them together at the editor, or even in runtime through code. And so let's say we've got a sword here, and in this case I've already put a mount point on it. We use one component here, and let's say when this sword was created, as it was in this one, that it's created, you know, something like in this orientation. Well, with mount points, what's cool is that I can just simply come in and if I drag it close enough to another mount point, what will end up happening is they snap together, and then the child mount point basically takes on the orientation of the parent. And so this is great if you've got different artists creating different kinds of weapons, and some create them along the z-axis or the x-axis. Well, what happens is mount points will make sure everything's oriented correctly just with a single line of code. And in this case, you saw it happening through the editor. So it's a great way to start basically equipping your characters, whether they're tanks or aircraft, or in this case, a human, being able to snap and put these together. But I think another thing I'm really excited about is skinned meshes. So not too long ago, I added the ability to add, basically instantiate skin meshes on characters, but I only allowed it through code at the time. So what I've really done is beef that up, and now what you can do is basically create a list here of different items, different skinned meshes your character is going to have, and then at edit time or runtime, what you can basically do is set the mesh, and you can create it here in the editor, and when you run, that mesh will be created as well. And as you can imagine, during runtime through code, it's really easy to go ahead and create skin meshes and add them as well. But I think one of the features that is cool that I put in is the problem is you get this bleed through, especially when you've got really tight clothes here. So I've added what I've called body skin masks. And so every object that you put on here basically can include a texture that lets you make the character underneath the clothes invisible. And so what that does is basically it looks like he's not bleeding through even though he really is. So you can tell as I toggle on and off these masks, this is what it would really look like. And it becomes a bit of a nightmare trying to make sure the clothes don't bleed through. Well, now with just a simple black and white texture, I can do that for you automatically. And so to me, I think that looks really good. I think it's certainly makes me pretty excited to be able to dress up the characters and get them looking the way I want. And again, you can basically build out an inventory here for your characters ahead of time of the pants that wear. So we start with a character that's, you know, basically naked here, and then we can go ahead and start equipping him in the editor and then at runtime as well. So I'll talk more about the mount points and skin meshes as I get ready to release 2.0, but I thought I would just show that. I think it's pretty exciting and pretty neat. Take care. Hey, this is Tim with Udi. I thought today I would go over a product that we have on the Unity Asset Store called Mount Points. What Mount Points allows you to do is connect objects together both at edit time and runtime. And they work sort of like magnets. Basically, you have a one mount point on one object, another mount point on another object, and as they get close together, they can snap together. And this is a great way to make sure things are oriented correctly, make sure things are parented correctly. So let me take you through an example here. So here I have our male avatar, and he has mount points on him, and I've went ahead and created 3 mount points, and you can see them here, one on his left arm, one on his head, and one in his hand. And now each of these mount points actually has an orientation. So if we look at the one on his hand, for example, if we look at the one on his hand, the blade basically, let's say it's a sword or a dagger, would come out this blue axis, the Z-axis right here. And so what that helps us do is no matter which way a weapon is created, sometimes I've seen them created with the blade going along the Z-axis, great. Sometimes I've seen them created where the blade's going along the Y-axis. So no matter which way a blade is created, we can make sure that it fits our avatar in the right position and the right orientation. So let me go ahead and give you an example. So here's a sword that we have. When it was created, the creator of it did a great job and created the origin at the hilt, and then basically created it so the blade was running down the Z-axis. Now again, that isn't always true. We have lots of assets that we've purchased where the blade goes up the Y-axis or the origin is in the center, and that can make a challenge when you're trying to basically be consistent and use it with your character. But let's go ahead and make a mount point for this. So we go ahead and add a component. And let's call this handle. Okay, so in this case, like I said, the creator did a good job, put it in the right place. But what we're going to do is we're still going to make sure that on our mount point, the blue arrow, the Z-axis, is pointing along the blade. So I'm going to change the orientation here. Okay. Now, what we can also do is when we're building mount points is we could tie mount points to specific bones, and we can set some other things that we don't need to do here for the sword because it's just a static mesh. But now here we've got our mount point created. It took all of, what, 5 seconds? And let's go ahead and lock it into place. Now, what will happen is if I move, let's say our blade was rotated. If I go ahead and rotate the blade, and then let's say we want to move it and we put it towards this other mount point, what's going to happen is it's going to snap to the right position and the right orientation. And again, imagine you've got different weapons created by different people, different orientations, all that stuff. It doesn't matter. Mount points will make sure that it, when you set them up, that it always connects to the right spot and the right orientation. Now, if I play this, what'll happen is because that right hand mount point was basically attached to the skeleton, then when we attach the sword to it, the sword now gets animated, as you can see here, and it all works as we'd expect. Now, the other thing that we can do, let me go ahead and break the connection, no problem, I just pull it away, is we can do this at runtime as well. So let's say I have an inventory and I know my sword is a prefab, it's in the inventory. All I have to do is call one line of code and say attach the sword, and boom, the mount points connect together. So let me show you that code. So right here is the line that we just called. So we basically say, here's the name of our avatar, here's the mount point on that avatar, here's the sword, this is the name of the sword object, and here's the mount point, and we connect them together. So with that one line of code, we did exactly what you saw. But it isn't just with static objects either. So let's take something like a skin mesh, like a pair of pants. What we can do is have that skin mesh put specifically on this avatar. So if I had 4 characters in a row, that's not a problem. They're all animated in a different way or at a different timing, let's say. I can just create a pants on each of them, and the same set of pants will follow the bones that are specific to the avatar that it's tied to. And in that way, what we can do is we can basically create a whole set of armor, a whole set of weapons, and swap them in and out for all of our characters. Tying in the skinned meshes like you just saw again is one line of code, which basically says for the shirt here, who's the object we want to tie it to, and then what's the location of the prefab that is the skinned mesh, this shirt, and we tie them together. And that's what you get. So mount points has worked out really well for us. I know other people are using it as well, and it's working well for them, and I hope you give it a try. Again, you can find that on the Unity Asset Store. Thank you.
And now we've got that selected, you can see the wireframe, and you can see that it has a lot of different polygons in, and we need to make sure that it has a lot of polygons to do is actually paint where we're going to constrain the mesh. So we can click on each of these vertexes, because you can see when I highlight them, if I zoom in to the top, but it doesn't really do anything that exciting. It might move slowly, like when my character to sort of knock in and out, and has a built-in collider on it, so it acts with a rigid body. A good way to test it is if we press play. You'll notice that I'm in game now. If I flick back to my scene, select the first person controller, and I select it whilst the game is playing, I can move it into that cloth and affect it based on the collider of which I'm using, and it'll only be affected by the collider that we've actually set it or given it. And you can do it similarly with, say we quickly select a create a 3D object and a sphere here, and we've got this sphere, it's got its own sphere collider on it. We'll go back to the cloth, we'll go on sphere colliders, add one, we'll say that the first collider, I'm going to add the sphere in here. We'll do exactly the same thing, play it, I'll go back into my scene, I'll grab the sphere, and I'll push it into the cloth as if we want to affect it. So essentially, that's pretty much the sort of simplicity of just having your cloth and being able to use a character or a different object to affect that in terms of physics. So hopefully that helped some people out.
Hey, this is Tim with Udi, and I wanted to introduce you to an upcoming product I'm releasing called the Bone Controller. So the Bone Controller takes the bones out of a skeletal mesh and uses bone motors to blend information with existing animations. So this is a great way to make your characters more reactive to the environment. You could take basically a basic attack animation, apply a motor to it, and now instead of the character just swinging forward, they're actually going to look around at the object and swing towards the object that they want. So these bone...
Так, секунду.
motors are a great way of making your environment and your characters feel like they're real. In this case, the bone motor here is looking at what's underneath the feet of the character and adjusting them to make sure that they're planted correctly. So altogether, we've got about 7 different bone motors, but the cool thing is that you can do things like add bones during edit time, or take, let's say, the tail of this dinosaur and adjust the bone properties so that it actually behaves in a more realistic manner than what a static animation might do. So the bone controller isn't just a collection of motors manipulating bones. What it really is allows you to manage the skeleton of your character. And what I mean by that is, on each of the individual bones, you can set things like limits or constraints. This keeps your head from maybe spinning 360 degrees or your elbows from bending backwards. Setting this once on the skeleton will have it applied to every motor that comes out of the bone controller. So the other thing you can do is set colliders on the bones themselves. And this is a great way to do things like ray casts that will let you know which bones you're hitting, and let you start targeting characters beyond just the static capsule collider that you normally see. So the bone controllers, in my estimation, is pretty cool with what it has, but what's neat is it's built to be expanded upon so that you or I could create our own custom bone motors using these standardized bones that have been extracted and are now part of the bone controller. So all in all, the bone controller's coming out pretty well. It's still in beta, so I'd ask you to be patient with it. But the cool thing is that you can help me improve it as we go along. So I hope you enjoy it, and look for it on the Unity Asset Store soon. Thanks. Hi, this is Tim with Udi, and today I wanted to introduce you to the bone controller. The bone controller is an FKIK solution for manipulating bones in real time. It's not a character controller, those already exist, and you can use something like the motion controller to control the animations of your character. What this does is basically allows fine-tuning of animations by allowing you to access the bones. Now the first thing that we're going to do is take the center bone, or the main bone of our skeleton, tell the bone controller about that, and you're going to see that we process those bones. And when we do, in the scene editor, all of a sudden those bones are visible. What we're going to do is normalize those bones and sort of abstract them out to make it easier to work with. And so there's going to be a lot of information we can go over later, but for now I just wanted to keep this video simple. But basically what we do is we normalize the bones and we make them available to bone motors. And what bone motors do is basically control the bones at runtime. And so we can do things like control the hands and the fingers or set poses. And in this example, what I'm going to do is go ahead and basically put on a finger pose motor that allows us to curl and uncurl the fingers. Now, once we set this to run in the editor, you can see that we can actually do this in the editor too. This way you can set poses or, depending on the motor that you're using, or set things up, see how it reacts, and then go ahead and put that in during runtime. But in this case, what you can see is that we've got pretty fine control over each of the individual fingers, or we can have control over the hand itself. But this is just one example of the motors. And the thing with the bone controller is that you can create your own motors as well. So we're not going to be limited to just the motors that exist today. So that's the bone controller, and I hope you check it out. Thanks.
Похоже на Locomotion System, но попроще в настройке. Камелот, спасибо за фоллоу. Угу. Прикольно смотрится все-таки. Не просто так горизонтально стоящий на склонах персонаж, а прямо так нормально. В общем, это тоже нам надо будет.
So, today the ground.
Длинная. В общем, из этого что тогда надо? Third Person Motion Controller, камера контроллер, Sword and Shield, Swimming, Mount Points, Bone Controller. И вот, наверное, вот это еще.
Hi, this is Tim with Udi, and today I wanted to show you the newest character controller that I've created. So I've talked about this before. The actor controller is actually going to replace Unity's built-in character controller, and it's actually going to become the new foundation for the upcoming motion controller V2. So this is me just sort of showing off a couple of the features that we've got in this latest actor controller. So obviously, I think what looks pretty cool here is this idea to what I call wall walking. So the ability to latch on to a surface, orient the character to that surface, and then have them crawl around on it is a pretty cool and I think unique feature of the actor controller. But one of the other cool features is the ability for you to define a shape. So in the standard Unity character controller, you're stuck with a capsule that's only in the upright position. Well, with the actor controller, you can actually define different body shapes and use multiple shapes to create something a little bit more complex. What you're seeing right now is the same actor controller, just using a sphere body shape that represents this basically rolling ball and controlling it that way. So you can now have characters with your characters on the actor controller as well. And so I think as you see this character go up here, you'll see that it's all pretty smooth. Hey, this is Tim with Udi. I wanted to put together a video on how to set up the actor controller. Now this isn't meant to go into a ton of detail and every option, but it's sort of a quick understanding of how the actor controller works, and it basically knows the basic and AI tells it to do. So character. So in this scene, I've got just a cube here that I'm using as reference. We got a simple floor, nothing special. But let's go ahead and drag on our character. There we go, so Kyle's here. And let's go ahead and add our actor controller. Okay, so the actor controller is, there's two different views. There's an advanced view, which we're not really going to go into, but there's the basic view, and then there's body shapes. And body shapes basically define the shape of your character. So again, we'll go into that in a little bit of a later detail, but this is the setup I like for humanoids. So in this case, we're not going to do anything fancy. We're just colliding with objects, no problem. Okay, so now we know basically how to do collisions and how to move, but we don't know where or when to move. So let's add a driver. So a basic actor driver is going to want to take input that the user gives it and basically push that input into the actor controller. Now, back to the presentation that I just showed you is, how do I get the input? The actor driver itself doesn't know whether you're using Easy Input Solution, you're using Unity's Input Manager, or something different. So basically it's looking for you to tell them what the input source is. So let's create that. And really all we're going to do for the input source here is add an input Unity input source component. So this is really just a simple input source, and again, people can create new ones as they see fit. But what this does is look at the Unity Input Manager, looks at the Xbox controller, has an option or two, and basically we're just going to drag it and tell the driver how it is that it's going to get this input. Okay, now the last thing we're going to do, just to create like a third-person view, is we're going to tie that camera to Kyle. Okay, now let's move it back a little bit here. Easy enough. Okay, so again, our driver is going to take input. It's going to then massage the input a little bit and push it onto the actor. Good. With that, we are. So we've got a character that moves, a character that can jump. Now we're not doing obviously anything super advanced here, but what we've got
это то, что я думаю.
Hey, this is Tim with UDI, and I wanted to go ahead and introduce you to a new tool I'm getting ready to release called Mesh Merge.
Для объединения
And the idea with
мешей,
Mesh
что ли?
Merge is that we can take multiple meshes objects within a scene, merge them together, and then this way we can reduce the
Oh, это
number of
прикольная
draw calls
тема.
that happen to increase
тоже надо.
performance. There's also a couple other features that we'll go over, but what I wanted to show you is the basic one real quick. So in the case of these mushrooms, these glowing mushrooms I have here, they're actually a prefab, but it's one mushroom, one object for each of these mushrooms. Now the reality is that isn't great for our draw calls, because I actually have to render out, let's say I've got 1,000 of these in a scene, I have to render, send to the render each of these mushrooms. Now there is batching, so if you've got dynamic or static batching on, it'll go ahead and make an improvement, but nothing really beats combining all of these objects into a single object based on the materials that they use. So let's do that. So if I go ahead and select this little group, I'm going to hit Windows, UDI Tools, Merge Mesh, and you can see in the window here it says that I've selected one object, that's this cluster here. There's one material in it, and there's 15 meshes. And if I just go ahead and merge, what I've done is basically cloned all of these individual meshes into a single mesh. And so that's what we have here.
Сколько максимально
Now
он может
over
так
in the
объединить?
inspector, this merged mesh object was created. And you can see that we actually still have access to the 15 source objects that it was created from. So we can show them, we can hide them, we can select them if we want to select them, and we can also come in and we can just delete them if we don't need them anymore. So in this case, they're just totally gone. And now what we've done is we've reduced these 15 objects down to a single, or 15 draw calls down to a single draw call. Okay? So the reality is, what I want to do is I want to do this to much bigger groups. So here's an example. Let's take all of these mushrooms over here. I just group them all. In this case, I've got 8 different objects over here selected, 2 materials, and the reason why this center group of mushrooms is actually using a different material, and a total of 118 meshes. No problem. What will happen is we actually get 2 mesh objects created because we had 2 materials. And so now, just like before, we've got one that represents these materials here, And we've got one that represents this set of materials here. So that's the basics of mesh merge, but I want to show you a couple other features that are pretty cool. I should probably turn on lights here. Okay, so one of the things that other tools don't do is support multiple materials on a single object. So in this case, I have one object, and it actually has two materials on it. It has this stone here for the floor, and then the border has a stone itself. Well, what I can do, I'm going to move this up because it'll be more obvious, is I can see over here that we have two materials, two meshes, and really what that is one mesh but two sub-meshes, and we can merge this as well. Now, what's actually happening here is two objects again are being created. We create one for each material type. And the reason why is if we had another object that used this particular material, it would be merged with this. And it makes the draw calls faster because it only has to send one material to the graphics card and render out all of these vertices, including perhaps another mesh at the same time. What it's also done interesting is actually split this one object apart too. So the reality is that's actually pretty useful for something else. Let me show you this. This is, I thought, pretty neat. So here's an object that I actually got from the asset store. I got it from an incredible artist who does some cool stuff. And it's one set of runes with some collision cubes on them. What I can do with this is you see that there are actually 4 materials that are used to create this one architectural piece. Well, and then there are 6 sub-meshes going on. Well, the interesting thing is if I do a merge on this, what I actually do is I split out the individual meshes. So here, for example, that's part of the mesh. Here's one of the sub-meshes. Here's another piece. So I can basically split apart objects based on the materials that are used. So that's another sort of cool side feature of this. But the overall idea here is that basically we're going to create a merged object, one for each material that exists within the selection. So in this case, we've got 8 objects. Some are mushrooms, some are rocks, 59 meshes, and what we're going to get out of this is basically 2 merged meshes. And that's what we get. And again, we can go back to them if we wanted, and we can show the original. So this has been a pretty cool tool for my own development in the game, only from the sense of I can place all of these individual mushrooms throughout the game.
В общем, ладно. На сегодня закончим. Коротенький такой получился стрим, но зато понятно, что нам нужно. И вот когда мы это все заполучим, то будет уже интереснее с этим всем разобраться. Все, всем спокойной ночи, пока-пока.